Hi, this is Gina Wagers, and this is the Module 9 case study. To kind of summarize what's happening in the case so far, there's a first-year assistant principal who is meeting with a student to address an attendance concern. A teacher contacted the assistant principal during their conversation about attendance because they observed the student passing something, suspected drugs, to another student. The assistant principal contacts the SRO, and both students are brought in and questioned by the assistant principal and the SRO at the same time, and they do find brass knuckles on one of the students. At this point, who is involved? The student that was being questioned about their attendance also has a record of discipline and other issues. He insists that the brass knuckles are his and that he pressured the other student to hold them for him. Then there's the other student who has no record of discipline issues, who corroborates that story. And then the SRO is also involved at this point and says that both students have to be taken to jail and charged with felony possession of a prohibited weapon on school property. Continuing then, after that, the parents are contacted and the consequences are explained per the zero tolerance policy that the district has. The assistant principal completes expulsion paperwork for one of the students, but not the other one. And then the assistant principal is contacted by the director of secondary education in the district and encouraged to follow the policy, or they are told that they will face an official reprimand, which will be documented in their personnel file. So at this point then, other people who become involved are parents. One of the parents is supportive of the consequence, while the other one, the first-time offender, is not even aware of the policy and questions the decision that the assistant principal has made. And then district administrators are also involved. They are telling the assistant principal to follow the policy or face a reprimand. So then thinking about what has happened, if there is any missing information or potential issues with this case, the assistant principal does seem to maybe have not understood or maybe potentially broken some protocol. Should the attendance and suspected drug passing incident have been addressed at the same time? Should there have been fact-finding or some kind of other investigation prior to bringing the SRO in and questioning the students? And then should both of the students be present and questioned at the same time together? There also seems to be some knowledge that's missing regarding the protocol and policies for the building and the district in general. When was that district policy on zero tolerance created or revisited? Has there been adequate training or communication to staff, students, and parents regarding the zero tolerance policy? And then additionally, inconsistent implementation of the policy then at this point seems to be a potential issue, because should both of the children be expelled? Should the assistant principal be receiving an official reprimand? So thinking about the potential issues, are there any legal or ethical problems here? Has anyone been harmed by the actions or decisions, or is there a breach of contract or any discriminatory actions? I think there is potential damage to the relationship between the parent and the student that did not have a record of discipline issues, just because there seems to be a lack of communication or understanding of the district's policy and processes. And it didn't seem like the assistant principal was able to adequately explain the policy and procedures that followed as a result of that. I think there's also maybe some ethical issues with the potential for the disciplinary action to be taken against the assistant principal for not submitting the expulsion paperwork for both students involved. Obviously, the assistant principal's personal values and the processes for decision making that are used in the professional school setting are not quite aligning, so that's creating some conflict and then further issues within this incident that happened with these students. So then synthesizing all of this information, thinking about what has taken place up to this point and where this is headed, the core issue seems to be that the building administrator has to decide whether to follow through on discipline for this district policy that does not align with his personal values, while also supporting the success of those students that are involved. So in order to make a decision moving forward, identifying missing information and why it's valuable to making a decision is important. Thinking about the people that are involved, I think district administrator to building administrator, there needs to be some fact-finding, some support in terms of explaining and understanding the zero tolerance policy, maybe some training or support in implementing that would be appropriate in this situation, because it doesn't seem like the assistant principal was prepared to have to explain this to a parent or have to implement that policy. Building admin to parents, also that relationship needs some support. When and how is this policy being communicated to parents at the building level is an important thing to find out, because if it's not being communicated at a building level to parents and it's just information that the district has, I think the administrators in this building have a responsibility to make sure that that information is being shared with their parents and families as well too. Thinking about the specific building at this building level, I think there are building policies and procedures that need to be also maybe revisited just for investigating and reporting incidents, because again, the assistant principal followed protocol and procedures with involving the SRO, but then did not seem prepared to follow through on the consequences that were associated with what happened when the SRO became involved. So it just seems like the building team needs to get on the same page as far as following policies and procedures when an incident happens as well. And then I think also thinking about all of the students, not just the ones that were involved in this incident, but the ones that attend this school in general. It seems like this policy also was not clear to the students, or maybe there's not a procedure for students to report bullying or harassment in these situations where they're being pressured into doing things, or they're not understanding the consequences for actions, certain actions, or having possession of certain things on school property. So it seems like there's an opportunity for building-wide policies and procedures to be looked at and reviewed, so that not only are the staff prepared to enforce them, but students are aware of those consequences before they make those decisions as well. And then thinking also, reflecting back on just the programs in this district in general, if the board has a zero tolerance policy and the consequence is to then attend the district's alternative education program, is it punitive or is it more restorative? And how is that supporting student success? What does that look like? Because that information would be necessary in order for the building administrator to communicate to the parents of the students who were involved in the incident. If this is their discipline consequence, they need that information. So then prioritizing that information, what we need to know in order to make the decision moving forward, I think priority number one should be the district policy and discipline process. Knowing who is knowledgeable about that at the district level that can support the assistant principal in following through on that process is very important. Are there exceptions to the policy? Or is there an appeal process that can be communicated to that parent, right? And how can that assistant principal support in that? Because the case study did mention that the assistant principal did promise the parent of the first-time offender that he would do everything he could to support whatever they needed. The second priority then would be, I think, after you handle the immediate situation involving these specific students, taking a step back and prioritizing needs for the specific building, collecting some data and feedback about where we can improve the processes and communicate this policy better within the building. Was the building process for investigating a report followed correctly? Who else needs to be looped in or included in that process that has relevant experience, like the SROs, teachers or support staff? Are students aware of these policies and consequences? Those are all things that I think need to be looked at and explored. And then also thinking about what needs to happen prior to another incident like this happening to ensure that this assistant principal is prepared to handle the situation with an improved decision-making process, because all of that information will help him moving forward. Priority number three, I think, would be identifying next steps and then coming up with a plan to address those concerns, not just the immediate short term involving the students with this incident, but then thinking about the building as a whole and these policies. Communicating district policies to parents at the building level, revisiting how that's being done, how often it's being done. Maybe also then offering training or buildings for the building and staff there on the policies and procedures for not just the building, but then also those district policies that they're expected to also follow through on. And then I think also there's an opportunity to educate students on these policies, the consequences, and maybe provide a process for reporting incidents like bullying, if the building doesn't already have that, to maybe help address some of the issues that came up during this specific incident with these students. So then thinking about the information and coming up with a plan, I think step one would be to actually follow through and complete the paperwork to comply with the district's zero tolerance policy. Within that, though, the policy in the case study did mention that there's a minimum requirement for the consequence. So I would maybe recommend the minimum for the first-time offender and then maybe 15 or so additional days for the student who has repeated issues with behavior incidents and who was the one who instigated the situation to begin with. That way there's some differentiation between the consequences for the students. Maybe that would be a little easier for the parent to then understand and is relevant to the situation. Step 2, I think, would be to then support the parent of that first-time offender in pursuing an appeal to the expulsion, if that is an option that the district has with this policy, offering support, acknowledging that the students should be successful beyond this incident is important in maintaining that relationship with that parent. More thinking long-term then as well, not just addressing this immediate concern with the students in this situation, would be to reflect on personal decision-making processes and review the building procedures for consistency in investigating and administering discipline during incidents in the future. I think that would help this building administrator so that if something were to occur again, they wouldn't feel like they trapped themselves into making a certain decision because they didn't think about all of the options as as things were happening in the moment. And then step 4 would be communicating and educating the building, whether that's staff, students, and parents, on the policy, but then also focusing on the long-term prevention of future incidents through improved building programs or processes, whether that's educating students, providing a way to report bullying, things like that. So evaluating the plan, there are a few benefits to following through on the policy, even though it does not align with this administrator's personal values. It's better than taking no action because at this point, the building administrator has a responsibility to understand and carry out the district's policies, and then also to understand and demonstrate good legal decision-making within the school setting. As soon as the SRO became involved and it became a legal issue, there really is no backtracking, right? We can't go back and make a different decision. So we just need to move forward with a plan that allows the building administrator to continue to model ethical behavior and be consistent. I think consistency is the key here, because if this building administrator were to choose to make an exception and not file paperwork for one student, they're setting a precedent for decision making in the future, where then they would be questioning or maybe have the same moral dilemma in the future about whether or not students deserve certain consequences based on the relationship that they have with the building administrator or how the building administrator personally feels about those kids. So I think you don't want to set a precedent where you're already having to go back and renegotiate how you've made decisions. So I think the best action moving forward is to follow through with the policy. Another benefit of that would be choosing to recommend different sentence links for the students, and then providing the parent support in pursuing an appeal allows the administrator to advocate for and communicate regarding an ethical decision even within the zero tolerance policy. So even though we're following the policy, we're still kind of having some differentiation in how the discipline is administered, just so that it aligns more with personally how we feel the discipline should go. It also allows the administrator to follow the established ethical framework for the district while kind of taking into account all of those ethical dimensions of this issue and advocating for the success of both of the students that are involved. It also allows the building administrator to make a plan for improving the building policies and procedures moving forward, looking at how those district policies are being communicated and supported. It also allows the building administrator to model ethical behavior in relationships and cultivate ethical behavior in others by making this decision. It also provides a clear framework for decision making that might involve similar ethical issues in the future. So potential issues with the plan: it does require admin to put professional values over their personal values, but again, it is for the greater good, the safety and security of the whole school. And then if communication of this policy doesn't improve, it could lead to high levels of frustration and lack of support from the district level. Reflecting on the plan, the best decision under the current circumstances is to follow through with the plan, comply with the policy, advocate for each student, by recommending different lengths of sentences, supporting an appeal process, advocating for ethical decision-making within that framework moving forward, and acting with integrity. It prevents discipline action against the admin and also ensures consistency that can be applied in future situations. So then successful implementation relies on support from the district level, additional information regarding the policy, communication, maintaining a